What up, familia? Is your favorite Puerto Rican, Brooklyn, Philly. I've already sh- pre-shuffled, already tongue twisted the deck. Just cut it, and the message is coming from, interestingly enough, the singer Sade. Right? If you know Sade, you know Sade. Specifically, her song "Cherish the Day," which moved in my spirit this morning and seems to go along with the theme of sacred consciousness, right? As self as sacred consciousness, right? Recognizing that humanity, right, has the right, right, of basic human dignity, and to understand that we as humans embody this sacred consciousness that can revolutionize, I'm hearing, the world, our planet, our cosmos, I'm hearing. And cherish the day, I think the reason why that song so beautifully illuminates it, even though initially a lot of us can look towards it, or when we hear it, it is dedicated to a specific partner. In this essence, I believe Spirit is saying is about finding a connection so profound that it makes the singer feel, completely secure and rescued, but not necessarily in another or only in another, but primarily in oneself, which would then continue the thread of the previous two videos that were established or foundational in reminding us of, what was called, titled the Michael Jackson Maxim, which is, I'm looking at the man in the mirror, I'm asking him to make that change. And then, of course, him and man would be, I'm looking at the human in the mirror, I'm asking him, her to make that change, right? The responsibility being both masculine and feminine, right? Essentially saying we all are responsible to do this. And the first card to fall out is misalignment. The second, metamorphosis. And the third, responding, not reacting, which again, Spirit is not letting up on this. These are very much the same cards that have been, so I don't know if it's telling me pull from another oracle deck necessarily, or re-emphasizing, reiterating that this is the central theme that is dear and near to Spirit at this time. Currently we are in Scorpio season, which is about deep transformation, right? Scorpio goes deep, right, into, I'm hearing, the recesses of the mind and the essence of oneself. Is asking us to dare to go into the deep, right? But not for, I'm here not to hurt us, right? But for, I had it on the tip of my tongue and it just, there's a hesitation. I'm hearing Spirit say, right? There's a hesitation, right? I'm hearing honor the feeling that comes with being asked to go into such depths of one's soul, of one's essence, of one's mind, right? Of one's emotions. Normally we are skeptical, at the least, right? To go into such depths, to endure such a feat, or to begin such a feat, because it will require of us to look under the bed or in the closet for the boogie monster, right? For what we have deemed within ourselves to be the boogie monster. I'm hearing, so now I believe Spirit is addressing the inner child within, because usually, when we hear about boogie monsters, or if you have been a parent, or even if you haven't as a child, most of us have been at some point or another been afraid of the dark corners, spaces, or areas in our upbringing, right? Whether it was our homes or alleyways or whatever, right? Darkness seems to be fearful. Interesting. They just correlated that to the misalignment, to the misnomer of race. But I'll put that to the side in terms of blackness, right? And the fear that it denotes. And how that has been played into to ostracize, isolate, and demonize essentially a whole peoples, right? Okay, so back to the inner child being scared of, I remember, my own children, keep the night light on. Or, for my daughter, we got her those little glow in the dark stars on her ceiling to give her comfort. Or typically you'll get a child a night light. Because with their little active imagination, they think they're these boogie monsters that they can, get them in the night. Particularly when you're training them to sleep in the room finally by themselves and have their own bedrooms, or whatever the case. Everybody's not the same, but interestingly enough, if we think of childhood as well, when one of the important things I'm hearing Spirit said is in this, going into this in-depth, right, inventory, self-reflection of ourselves, we come to realize, I know this happened to me personally, that a lot of the stories that I was retelling, both consciously and subconsciously to myself and others, were based on my childhood interpretation of that specific event. And what becomes, for lack of a better word right now, problematic with that, or what I saw, that it tainted my view in such a way, not because I was doing it maliciously, but when you're a child, you don't have a lot of the understanding, and not because you're not intelligent enough, or it has nothing to do with that. It's just psychologically, right? Physiologically, biologically, you are unable to process certain events, especially if they're traumatic events, from let's just say, for lack of a better, a logical viewpoint. You just are unable to. You can't differentiate, so for example, I'm hearing with Shane, thank you, Brene Brown, she explained it so beautifully. She says that Shane says, I am fundamentally bad, or something is wrong with me, as opposed to the event or the behavior is what's wrong, or what was quote unquote bad. And the child who takes on shame doesn't have the capacity to make the distinction. And if not instructed otherwise by a legal guardian or the community, they tend to take on the former, which is, something is essentially wrong with me. I, as a human being, am bad. Not that my doing was bad. That, no, the very essence, the core of me. Hence why I believe Spirit is talking about, just to cover her up, misalignment, right? And look at her face, right? When we live with that premise, if that's the understanding we place on the event, whether it was we were scolded by a parent, by a teacher, a more traumatic event, and trigger warning. But I do have this note here that Spirit, at some point, I didn't know where it was going to come up, but it came up, and it would speak to what happens at gatherings, particularly family or community gatherings, to children. So let me elaborate again. Trigger warning: if you're sensitive to at this time, you might not want to listen to this part or fast forward. But in my experience personally, and now being a human being on this planet for over 50 years, listening to other people's stories, as well as what I have noticed, that a lot of atrocities, right, occur to particularly children who are unable to speak up for themselves, who are still afraid of the boogie monsters. These gatherings become sometime the perfect, I'm hearing, breeding place for inappropriate behavior. Let me elaborate. So typically, whether it's and they wanted me to specifically say whether it was, because some people want to say, well, at religious gatherings, no, whether religious, non-religious, familial, non-familial, can be community, particularly where people gather. And in these gatherings where the adults may be preoccupied with themselves, in the kitchen, cooking, playing specific games amongst themselves. It becomes even a little more dangerous when we add intoxicants and mind and mood altering chemicals. In those moments, and even without them, Spirit is saying, because dopamine comes from laughter, and you know what I mean. So in any where we then are not supervising children, this is where there's room for curiosity amongst themselves, and or and this is the trigger warning for individuals who are not healthy, who may themselves have been victims of abuse, that becomes the playground for abuse to be perpetuated, particularly sexual abuse and molestation and or physical violence, because the adults are usually preoccupied again in whatever other endeavors, and they usually will send the kids to the basement to go to the basement to play, or go to your room to play. Or so one of the things that Spirit brought up for me, and I didn't know this was going to go this way, but okay, I'm just going to be obedient, was the recent movie that I had watched about the autobiography of Aretha Franklin. And clearly there you saw that this little girl with this gift at the time of song and music, who was proudly displayed by her father and her parents, right? And rightly so, as a gift. Who would think that there's anything wrong with encouraging her gift? But as we saw, when the adults came out to play and the children were sent to bed, that became the very breeding ground where she was abused and even impregnated, not once, but I believe a couple of times, by an older, I don't know if he was I can't recall if he was a family member or not, but a friend, quote unquote, of the family, while they were downstairs communion, right, gathering. And then that brings me now back to the song Cherish the Day. If we're talking about, Sade is in her song so beautifully saying to cherish the moments, the precious moments that we have, and especially when it is found in love, right? In a love where you can feel safe and secure. And so safe and secure that she uses lines like, "You only can rescue me, and I wouldn't even want to go to heaven without you." I mean, think about the deep impact of that bond, that relationship. And now Spirit is back to trigger warning, is having me point that sometimes the abuse is inflicted on children by people that they do initially feel secure and attached with, because it is a family friend or even a family member. And then them being young and not able to distinguish yet, right? Differentiate, not because there's anything wrong with the child, but if you just look at childhood development and the developmental stages, you get a clear picture of it. They fully trust, right? And not only do they fully trust, but if the perpetrator, it's saying, don't tell anyone, or if you tell someone, I will hurt you or hurt your parents, or I will lie and say you did, you know what I mean? Whatever. The child doesn't have the capacity to make sense of that, and hence they then internalize the shame, and it becomes the dark place, right? The secret place. Again, going back to the boogie monster. So if, in order to address this misalignment, Spirit is asking you to go deep, right? Particularly during this Scorpio season, right? For many of us. And in going deep, I have to face those boogie monsters, whatever they may be for us. For everybody, it isn't, thankfully, sexual abuse. But it can be other physical abuse, emotional abuse, verbal abuse, by friend, family, or foe, bullying, right? Silent bullying that happens through jokes and or maybe being invited into the group only to kind of like Carrie be disrespected and disinvited again. If we are going to confront those issues, right? Maybe the father who wasn't there, or the mother who couldn't control her emotions, right? Now we're talking about this wounded child in us, right? Which would explain the reason for the misalignment and why we then later on in relationships, whether it be at work with coworkers, in our personal relationships, a lot of those relationships and people are really teachers for us, right? We talk about triggers, and even me, I'm being sensitive enough to say trigger warning, because most of us want to avoid the triggers, see triggers as a bad thing, quote unquote, when they actually are indicators and very much signs, arrows and signs. I'm hearing, every time I say signs now, I think of the Quran, and I think of the ayat that says the signs are all around us, right? And how I think that even beautifully plays into this, right? To say that the signs are all around us. And even back to that scenario for whatever gathering, if us as the people responsible for these little people, we have to pay attention to the signs, right? Sometimes they're right there, right before our eyes, and we just choose for whatever reason. I'm not placing blame, the one thing now as an adult, as a mother, and have some experience, in going back into these depths and retelling this story, I view my parents now very differently, because I went back in to retell the stories and look at the stories that I was telling myself, particularly even about my parents, not justifying any behavior. No, that's not what I'm suggesting here. However, now I can look at my mom and say, wow, I know what it is now as a woman of color, just in this world alone, as a woman of color with a certain economic status, as a woman of color with a certain economic status, who knows what it is to be married and then a single parent and all that that entails. And then also with all of those titles to say parenting in and of itself, or even if you're not a parent, because I'm not trying to exclude, relationship dynamics in and of themselves are hard to navigate. There isn't a blueprint necessarily for it, right? And it's hard to create a blueprint for it because we're all so beautifully individually, different and unique. We truly are these magnificent, unique unicorns, right? And we bring only what our existence can bring to a community, to a family, to this world. So to try to create end all be all blueprint is dangerous. And I think that, I'm hearing the melting pot theory and assimilation. I think we've seen even the atrocities that has happened when we try to stick or stuff a square into a round peg hole. And trust me, I've tried, both with self and others, right? So Spirit is saying, I understand, and I want you to know I have compassion, and I am not taking it lightly, that what I am asking of you, right, is not an easy task, right? It's not an easy journey, and it's a low road, I'm hearing, and load. It's a load on a road less traveled, I'm hearing. And Spirit wants me to speak to those who, may not share that dogma, that faith, that's not your disclaimer, because that's my disclaimer. I believe in this oneness, right? This, if I am sacred consciousness, and I understand all of humanity holds this sacred consciousness, then yes, I do believe there is this one collective sacred consciousness. But that's my disclaimer. But that is not all of ours, and to respect and honor yours. If you are an atheist, and even an agnostic listening to this, Spirit wants you to, and I would, your sacred consciousness. Let's remove the language of spirit right now. Your sacred consciousness, your very existence, because if you're listening to this message, if you're alive at this point, if you have breath, you are sacred consciousness, beloved, worthy of all good things, right? Worthy of the basic inalienable rights of human dignity and self-respect, right? You're not void, and no matter your color, race, creed, religion, or lack of religion would remove that from you. And as I said that, the sunlight started shining, right? So if you're just looking at your higher self, or at your sacred conscious self, your very being, it is acknowledging that this isn't easy, that it is initially painful, right? But so worth it. I can only speak from experience, I, as a child of an addict, and with myself, an addictive personality, to say the least of many other things, one of the things that I did for years is numb, escape, avoid, always bracing for the next impact, and then looking at the world outside of me as a jungle. I would have called it the concrete jungle, but as a jungle to navigate and to survive, though, but to navigate it in survival mode. So that meant fawn, which is people pleasing, freeze, which is, self-sabotage and stagnation, fight, which is I fought, not proud to say it, but in the literal sense and in the figurative sense, both against myself and others, right? And flight, right? I ghosted and have been ghosted. So knowing that I, use that methodology for many years, I know what it is to not wanting, and it was all one, survival, but also it's not wanting to feel, right? Not wanting to feel the pain. So that was a lot, Spirit. But this is what Spirit is saying. And if you are, or your sacred consciousness, whatever, you decide, and it is your decision. I want you to know that, it's not what the world wants to say you should do or not do, or be or not be, right? It is essentially your decision, beloved. And I just saw that my battery is going to go low. And all we did was talk about the first oracle card, which is misalignment. And it reads, miracles become normal, normal, once we face all of the aspects of our life in the same direction. I'm going to read that again. Miracles become normal. You know what? I just heard no. I apologize. Because again, even the word miracles, right? It makes it fairy and airy, right? And this is very concrete and real, I'm hearing, right? Very much a part of our very essence, right? And it's the imperative. It's so important because you're worth it. Because I'm worth it. Because we, as a humanity globally, we're worth it to correct the misalignment, right? If you have a misalignment in your back, we go to the back doctor. If there's a misalignment in the business, there are ways to correct and heal, right? And it's personal, I'm hearing, very personal. But the beautiful thing about it being one so personal to us, that when we do it individually, then we set examples for and give permission unconsciously for others around us to do the same, right? It becomes this beautiful energetic field effect, I don't know, a ripple effect, like the pond, that pebble you throw in the water, right? It just keeps going, and you have no idea, I have no idea the extents of where that ripple will reach, right? I'm reminded of Curious George. I'm showing my age, right? But in Curious George, one of the episodes, I remember when Curious George lost his little sailboat into the sewer, and then he went to the excuse my ignorance of the naming, but the where we where the sewers all lead so that the water can be purified and all that. And then his lesson there, he learned that everything that we throw in the sewer, reaches out to the oceans, and then even impacts all of the living creatures, again, because all things that are living are sacred. But the extent, right? The fish, the shrimp, and then those people in those oceans, and and how it contaminates or impacts the ocean itself, but then the peoples who then fish in those oceans and then take it back to their lands, and then they're eating it, and then we're eating and ingesting that. So just we really think, I'm hearing now 5 Degrees of Separation. I believe that's a movie, but we really think we're so different. We're so far apart, and we're so, I don't know, can I say it like this? So closer than we think. I don't know. It doesn't sound like proper English, but we are one. Yeah, we really are one. There is this oneness, this sacred consciousness. But I think that I think that that's what the card misalignment. And then 7 and 1 is 8. That numerology is important. Spirit wants me. I always think of the 8 of Wands, to be honest. So it feels like fast moving energy. So it's almost, when I'm hearing it that way, that we dread so long and resist so long to go into that depth. But what we find, or what I have found, is that once I've plummeted in, the rise back has been glorious and very quick. It wasn't at all what I was bracing myself for and anticipating for, interestingly enough. So in numerology, the number 8 represents power, ambition, authority, and abundance, governed by the planet Saturn, right? It is associated with material success. So in that, I hear Spirit saying there's something about even the way our finances and how you move and think about that, how that's impacted and affected by the failure to do this moral and selfless and fearless moral inventory of ourselves, as I spoke about in the previous. That's not my language, that's the language of Alcoholics Anonymous, and one of their steps from their 12 steps. It is associated, but also carries, lessons of balance, responsibility, and resilience, right? And that's the one thing that I heard loud and clear. I don't know if that could be the title, but everything is a lesson and everyone is a teacher, right? Hence back full circle to triggers. We fear them and we say, oh, you trigger me. But we become these mirrors to one another, right? And sometimes the thing we tend to quote unquote, and I tell my children and my grandchildren, hate is such a strong word, but that we dislike in others usually is because they're holding a mirror to us, and we say, no, I don't do that. You may not do that you might not exhibit that exact behavior, but the behavior, remember, is just a symptom of a root. There's a root that then comes out in that behavior. And what I found in my self-reflection and in my questioning, why don't I like my mother-in-law so much? Back then when may she rest in peace now. This is when I was a younger girl. But anyway, I digress. Why don't I care for this specific supervisor? Or why every time this person comes around me, it ruffles my feathers so much? And what I found, that when I did the deeper, looking into it, right, that scorpionic depth, I usually found that I shared a similar belief. There was a root that was common between us, and they exhibited one way and I exhibited in another way. So yeah. The next card, Metamorphosis. Right. And I'm hearing from Spirit, this is 33 minutes. It's long. That first card and that intro was just in and of itself very long, and I'm hearing to break it down into segments, and then that would also allow for full charge of the iPad, so that way when I go into the next oracle card, there's no interruption. And yeah, beloved, this is where I will leave you for the portion of this message. Again, it began with the song from Sade. Shout out to Sade. I love her music. She's one of those, just like Michael Jackson, I can listen to the entire album. But it begins with that sacred love that made her feel secure and safe, and made her want to cherish every moment, right? Present moment with, right? What I'm hearing is that your sacred consciousness is saying it must begin with you. When you have that type of love for self, right, then it can be beautifully extended out to other. Then you can find it in another, because not only can you just find it in another, I believe we energetically will be able to find it in another, because that other that deserves to receive it from you as well. It becomes a symbiosis, right? A synergy, you know, a reciprocal relationship, not a transaction. Relationship, right? And yeah, that's the first part. Well, okay, beloved, I am so grateful and feel so honored to be able to share this space with you, hold space for you, and hopefully, you know, I feel you're holding space for me. I want to thank our my disclaimer is divinity, right? This oneness, this sacred consciousness. I want to thank the sacred consciousness within myself that doesn't think it robbery to honor, you know, self and others in this way. Until next time, beloved, have a beautiful one on purpose. Ashe, amen, and amen.